Hi guys, it's Sophie. So today is the first of my around the world wrap-ups. Today we are going from Portugal to Switzerland, so we're not going terribly far, but we're starting out in Europe, as you know. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to chat about each of the books that I've read for each one of these countries, tell you what I thought about them and let you know anything interesting I've learnt along the way about those countries. I was going to do 10 facts in 10 countries, but at least for Europe I've not learnt as much as I thought I was going to, just because of the kind of books I've read. So not necessarily doing that to start with, though that may arrive later. So I'm just going to put little facts in as we go. So the map that we're about to see was very kindly gifted to me by Jen Campbell. He was an absolute sweetheart and I wasn't expecting it at all, but I am definitely going to be using it throughout this challenge. So the first country that I'm going to talk about today is Portugal. The book that I read for Portugal is The Double by Jose Saramago. This book was translated by Margaret Jill Costa. I love Saramago. If you've been here for a while, you know that he is one of my favourite authors. If you haven't picked him up, please go and do so. Saramago's style is unlike anyone else, really. He isn't really a fan of punctuation and he writes with kind of unusual sentence structure, but once you get into it, it is an absolutely gorgeous way of writing. He plays around with like the fourth wall almost in writing a lot, and sort of he lets you know that you're reading a book without it becoming a kind of obnoxious part of the book. It's very much part of his writing, and that's something that I really appreciate. So what is this particular book about? The Double is about a man who is living a fairly ordinary life as a history teacher. He's in a very, you know, uncommittal relationship, let's say, with a woman who's far more interested in him than he is in her, and he is bored, he's depressed, he has lost interest in his life. One day a colleague, a mathematics teacher, recommends that he watch a film to try and lift himself out of this depression, and when he does so he finds a man who is identical to him in every way, playing a bit part character in this film. And this book follows our main character as he attempts to uncover the identity of this man, who is essentially him. It's a story all about self, and it is chilling in a strange way, but with a sense I think of comedy in there as well. I think that the main selling point of Saramago is the writing style. I'm going to try and find you just a quick quote just to try and give you the idea of the kind of writing that he has and what I love about it. Okay, so in terms of the writing, like the beautifulness that I love, the night was still clinging to the city's rooftops. You can't get there. In terms of the humour, Tertullino Maximo Alfonso fell onto the sofa, not into the armchair, which was not large enough to contain the physical and moral collapse of his body. It's gorgeous. Saramago is one of my absolute favourite writers. I think I gave this one 4 stars, not quite a 5-star read. I've liked others that he's written more, but he is absolutely one of my favourites, and I would really recommend this book, and really all of his work. Everything I've read has been a revelation, to be honest. One of my absolute favourite authors. And next we're going to be making our way to Spain. So the book that I read for Spain I've had for a long time. This one is Landing by Laia Fabregas, and it was translated by Samantha Sheeny. This one I picked up when I was in Stockholm, which was last March, so it's nearly been a full year that I've held on to Landing without reading it, and I've done really well because I was actually saving it for Around the World particularly. I picked this one up because of the fact that it focuses on, or kind of focuses on, the experience of someone on a plane, and I feel that flying is a very particular experience, and it's one that I tend to forget the sense of when I'm not doing it, and I thought, do you know what, I'm going to read this on the plane. and I didn't, obviously. But this story is about a young woman who sits next to an elderly man on a plane, and they get to discussing kind of their lives and the ways in which they've interacted with their country, Spain, and also their kind of experience of emigrating from Spain and the fluidity of Europe. So they begin this conversation about their lives, and as the plane lands, the man dies. He dies in the aeroplane. The young woman, who is sitting sort of trapped by the old man, picks up one of his belongings, a small locked box, and takes it off of the plane with her while waiting for the police to come and pick up his body. She doesn't know quite why, but she feels as though she's somewhat entitled to this piece of his life due to the conversation they've had and the strange circumstances of his death. The story goes between her life and his life as a young man, and it kind of explains the interrelation between these two individuals. So the woman is Dutch, the man was Spanish. It's very much about how those two countries interweave one another. Now, the thing that I thought was interesting about this book was actually the way that it discussed how labour is kind of moved around in Europe. So in this particular book, there is a factory that is open in the Netherlands, which is seeking workers from rural Spain. And I found that really fascinating. I had always kind of had some idea about this kind of immigration from particularly Eastern Europe to the UK. That's particularly kind of the immigrant population of the area I live in. I hadn't really thought about the other ways in which labour migrates around Europe, so that was interesting. Unfortunately, I didn't really like the book itself. I felt as though, I think it might have been a poor translation because it felt quite stilted, and it felt a little bit, I think it felt a little bit safe. I think if it hadn't have had that aspect of the work element to it, I probably wouldn't have wanted to finish it. It's not awful, it was just fairly predictable. You kind of knew where the story was going, and the writing, as I say, was quite stodgy, but I think that may have been the translation. I can't obviously swear to that as I've not read it in the original Spanish, but that's the sense I had from the writing. It felt as though there was no lyricism almost to the text itself. So I wouldn't recommend this one, but I did learn a few things from this book from Spain. And the next country that I read from was Andorra. The book that I used for Andorra is this. It's The Microstates of Europe, Designer Nations in a Postmodern World by Christiann Klieger. This one I'm going to use for a number of countries. I think I've read all the countries I'm going to be reading from now. But it was a very short one, and there was one book that I was aware that was by an Andorran author, but it was kind of outside of my price range and outside of my word limit, so I didn't go for it. I actually found this quite interesting. This is non-fiction. I read kind of the introduction, talking about nationhood and what's special about microstates, what's special about the surviving microstates, because it turns out there are lots of microstates that have just died, and these particular microstates that survive in Europe are almost tiny kingdoms in their own right, and they are quite a special version of nationalism. Now, Andorra itself, I think is a fairly interesting location, in that I'm trying to find the description of what they'd said. He describes Andorra as an unlikely wedge of granite broken with stacks of grey shale, and having looked up some pictures, it does really look like that. It's an absolutely tiny place. It's 18 miles wide by 16 miles long, and I think only has one sort of town inside of it. The thing that I learnt that I found most fascinating about Andorra was that Andorra had a civil war, and at the stage at which the first person died, they declared the civil war over. So I rather like that. As soon as the fighting began, it then stopped. And yeah, Andorra, among the other microstates, is a really wealthy location because they don't tend to engage in war, they tend to remain kind of neutral, and due to the small population size, they don't have such issues with like poverty and inequality. So yeah, that was Andorra. Yeah, a bit of a shame that I couldn't have read something by an Andorran, but I'm sure you can appreciate the country itself is tiny. So the next country that I made my way to was France. And the book that I chose for France was The Birth of a Bridge by Maylis de Kerangal, and this one was translated by Jessica Moore. This book. This book. Okay, I've never read anything quite like this, and my god did I love it. How do I even start? This is a book about a company building a bridge, and yeah, how is that possibly interesting? And it's one of the most compelling, like thrilling things I've read in a really long time. Her writing is very strange. She plays with place, she plays with the world really. So it's all kind of set in California, but it's not California. Like there's bears and it's kind of in the middle of a jungle, and it kind of feels like a mixture between lots of different places. There's kind of descriptions of other places in the world as well, like Dubai and other places, like sort of these grand underground German, like I guess like underground transport systems, and it's just a sense of like a world that is slightly removed from our own, but is close enough to feel kind of eerie. And I think the thing about this book that was so well done, I gave it 5 stars. Just well, so gosh. But one of the things I loved most about this book is the translation is absolutely impeccable. So in the original French, she writes and includes a lot of neologisms, and clashing word use is how I would best describe it. For example, polish corroded on black nails for nail polish. So using words that normally wouldn't be paired with one another. And the translation is excellent. It really gets a sense of that. The translator's note at the end says that when she was translating it and she had sort of an option to go with a couple of words, she always chose the one that made the least sense, because that's how it reads in the French, and it was fantastic. And I would, yeah, I'm definitely going to go and read Men the Living, which is the other one of hers. I think she's only got one other out. In terms of the story itself, there are individual characters who we follow. We follow a woman who is in charge of pouring concrete. We follow a man who operates a crane. We follow one of the sort of big bosses of the site. We follow individuals who live in the local area. But it's a way of focusing on really big issues in really small packages. So we're talking about the impact that construction and modernisation has on landscapes and people, and the world, and the ways in which money and advancement and pleasure and hedonism can kind of overrun the rest of the sense of a place. It was just a really exciting book. It was a really different book. Yeah, and I'm really glad I picked it up. I definitely will be reading her other book too. But this is not something that like automatically appealed, I have to say. Didn't automatically appeal, but I absolutely love it. And I have this image in my head of this bridge like arriving out of nothingness in this jungle, and it's beautiful. I would highly recommend you go and pick this one up. And the final country that we're going to be talking about today is Switzerland. So my choice for Switzerland was actually one that I picked up fairly last minute, and that one is All Days and Night by Peter Stamm. Oh, I should say this one was translated by Michael Hoffman. This book I think was more interesting in the concept was more interesting to me than actually the execution of the book, though I can understand that it may be appealing to other people. I thought it was going to go somewhere different, and I think I felt a little bit disappointed by that. This is a book that opens with a young woman who has had a pretty ideal life. She has everything she could have wanted. She has a husband, she has a family, she has friends, she has kind of everything really. Who is in a really terrible car accident and her face is damaged. She actually loses her nose. And the book is about her partly dealing with the loss of her identity in terms of her facial disfigurement, which was the element that I had thought the book purely focused on, and actually it explores ideas of how a change in your physicality might give you freedom, and sort of goes on to her life more broadly, which I understand, and as I say, I think a lot of people may enjoy that. But I had the sense that we moved away from the reason for the change fairly early on, and I would have been more interested to see how it affected her as in herself, as opposed to her interactions with other people, which is more of how the novel goes. She has a sort of strange relationship with her husband, and sort of before the crash, and it leads to some sort of strange feelings after the crash, because he has died and she hasn't, and she feels as though she's almost no longer the same person as she was before she came in. She goes through a series of fairly gruelling operations, and her family don't even want to see her during that time, so it is a very traumatic experience for her and a moment of sort of personal change, but I just thought it was going to go somewhere slightly different. It is translated beautifully. The writing is very clear, and it read, and I think again this is what I'll say sometimes in terms of translation, it read as though it had been written in English, as in there was no time at which you felt as though a sense or a metaphor or an impression had been removed by the act of translation, which does happen sometimes, so I thought the translation was brilliant. Yeah, so I think I probably will read more Peter Stamm in future, but unfortunately I didn't love this one as much as I had thought I was going to. I thought that it was going to do something slightly different, and I think probably the fault in the book was just that it wasn't the book I expected as opposed to the book itself. But I do think quite a lot of people would enjoy this one, and yeah, there's lots of others that sound really interesting too, so I'm still going to pick them up in future, and I wouldn't recommend you against it. I would just say that be aware that the blurb isn't the sort of sole focus, I suppose, of the book. It's a lot about relationships and freedom as well. So those have been my first 5 books for around the world. Cool, right? I'm nearly on 10 now. I've got 1 book that I'm reading at the moment that will take me to 10, and then I can film my next 5. Though my next 5 will be short because I think 3 of them are in here. But we're going with it. We're doing 5 and 5s and 5s. That's how we're running with this. I hope that you've enjoyed this video. I didn't realise quite how excited I was about this until I like sat down to film, and I'm so glad it's happening. And do you know what? It's really made me like love reading again. Like I've been rushing home and like rushing and having my dinner and stuff to like start reading because it feels like such a fresh challenge and something so different. So yeah, hopefully you guys are enjoying the content. Let me know down below if I've sold you on any of these books. And let me know if there's anything from any of those countries that you think is an absolute must read, whilst I'm obviously not going to have time to read it this year. It'd be great to share the love of books from these 5 countries in the comments down below, if you have any authors or books that you particularly love. Yeah, so I'll see you guys soon in my next video, and look after yourselves until then. Bye!